Good evening, welcome. Welcome to this special Friday edition of the Monday evening lecture series to coincide with our graduate open house today. I want to welcome all of the potential students that could be entering next year, and also suggest that if you offer to buy any of the current students a drink at a local establishment, I'm sure that you will get all the information you need. They're a very easy bunch. Spirited. They stand corrected. Couple quick announcements. This coming Monday is Carmen Munoz from Barcelona who will be lecturing. A week from Tuesday, which is the 14th of April, Ben van Berkel of UN Studio from Amsterdam. And 2 weeks from Monday on the 20th, Michael Speaks, Dean of Kentucky. As our Eva Maddox Endowed lecture this evening, it gives me particular joy to welcome Sharon Johnston and Marklee, Marklee, longtime friends, and I am a longtime fan of their work. Sharon has a bachelor's degree from Stanford, Mark B.Arch from UIC, and both had M.Archs from Harvard, where they met. Soon after graduating from Harvard, they formed Johnston Marklee and began teaching at UCLA, where I had the good fortune of teaching alongside them and developing a series of shared interests and preoccupations, and due to that proximity, both architectural and recreational. You could say it was a collusion of high and low culture. They introduced me to extreme experimental high fashion and cuisine, and I introduced them to bowling and poker. In fact, Mark and I shared an office in the basement of Perloff Hall at UCLA. They're not teaching there anymore, so anyone who's thinking of UCLA, don't even get together. They're not there. No one's there. Mark and I shared an office in the basement of Perloff Hall, which coincidentally had been the office of Charles Jenks when he was there. And occasionally we would respond to calls for Charles Jenks and answer and give replies as if we were answering for Charles Jenks. And even then we had a bit of an Oscar and Felix thing going on in terms of the office management and upkeep. Let me just say fastidious, less fastidious. You will certainly recognize Sharon and Mark's work when you see it. The work has won PA, AIA, Chicago Athenaeum Awards, among many others. Has been published and exhibited widely. For sure you'll know the Hill House in the Pacific Palisades, the Sail House in Venice, the Writers in Residence Studios in Marfa, Texas, the conjoined fashion boutiques of Ma Meg and Maison Martin Margiela in Beverly Hills. In-progress work is now expanding from LA internationally to include an art complex in Italy, the View House in Rosario, Argentina, hotel villas in China, and a house called House for the Ordos 100 project in Inner Mongolia. I don't know where Inner Mongolia is, but I assume it's right before you hit Outer Mongolia, which is the only Mongolia I know. What makes them, I think, unique in the context of LA and younger offices in LA is not only their early success and really success both intellectually, academically, in publications, and really an incredible body of work for a very young firm, is that you've probably seen the work before, but not necessarily heard of Mark and Sharon. That means that they're both extremely talented and very modest, and I can tell you that that's a rare combination in LA, which is typically posturing and less talented. Their work is always clever and refined while looking easy and cool. And in the noisy, sometimes overheated and belabored context of the LA school, whether the early LA school of Frank Gehry and company, or the later second LA school of the newer Digerati, the work of Sharon and Mark is exceedingly fresh, and really there's only a couple of others, I think, working in LA in that way, and friends of the school, other friends of the school named Neil Denari and I think like those two, although those two are half a generation more senior ahead, and I think in some ways Mark and Sharon have been much more successful in getting their work out and the message out. Sharon and Mark are once architects, as well as unabashed purveyors of popular culture and connoisseurs of all forms of cultural production, which for them architecture is one manifestation. They have an unerring sensibility to know the exact balance between the plausible and the surprising, and it's always a great learning experience to see them and hear them and talk to them, and I think it'll be a great lesson also for the work in the school, and even in particular maybe the first and second year grad studio problems in particular. So please join me in welcoming Sharon and Mark, who we hope come back often.
Over the years of sharing an office with Bob, I also learned a lot of things that he liked and disliked. And one of the things he liked is tripartite organization. So especially tailored tonight's lecture with a lot of images with threes here, just to get him excited again. But thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation and the opportunity to be here and share some of our work and some of our thoughts. Tonight we'd like to show you our work over the last 10 years, some of the things that interest us, and we hope we can finish it within an hour, but we're going to go very, very fast. We'll try to. This first image represents 3 rules. Sharon and I met in Harvard, as Bob mentioned. 3 rules which teaching assistants at Harvard have to follow when they're alone in a room with a student of an opposite sex. The first rule is that the light bulb has a minimum 60 watts has to be lit. The second rule is that the door of that room has to be open, a minimum of 90 degrees. And the third rule is that a minimum of 3 feet have to be touching the ground simultaneously. We thought that's a pretty good theorem for architecture. It has to be wide enough to see, open enough to get into, and at least 3 feet touching the ground. But I think what interests us is also, we think the first 2 rules pertain to cultural policies. It has to do with vision, has to do with privacy. I think it often oscillates if you're in a different historical moment or you're in a different culture. And the third rule, however, pertains to instrumentality. It has to do with technique. It's much more universal. And I think these 3 images reminds us not to confound advances in cultural policies and advances in instrumentality. Over the 10 years, we've done about 50 projects, about half of them built. And oftentimes things happen in a very fast pace, and we thought 10 years is a good time to take stock of what we've done. Sometimes the responses to each particular project happen in a very hyper-specific context, that we're responding to a problem or a particular situation. But over the years, as we see the body of work, certain commonalities begin to emerge. So for us giving this talk, sharing the work with you, for us is also rethinking some of the things that we have maybe unconsciously repeated or followed, even for different projects in different contexts. This is artwork by Kim Dingle, the title of which is United Shapes of America. And it is a composite drawing of 100 maps, 100 US maps, drawn from memory by Las Vegas teenagers. And as you can see, it's clear that some of these teenagers have some problems. and most of them should not apply to architecture school, with the exception of, I think, this one, who has a truly global understanding. But I think what interests us about this piece is also the efficacy of this piece actually hinges on this mnemonic shape that everyone knows. And because this is always there, all these differences begins to emerge. And I think we also ask ourselves this question within our discipline. What is the equivalent? When things are changing, when everything is architecture, what is the thing that is particular to architecture that doesn't change? Or is it Rossi's memory and typology? Is it Eisenman's geometry or syntax? I think these images like this help us think of, as we face different problems, as time changes, different cultural policies and instrumentalities begin to emerge. What are the unchangeable part? I think for us, this is a question that we always ask. So on that note, I'd like to start showing you some of the projects. This is one of the first projects we did. It's a 1-week project that it never got built. And but for us, when we look back at this project, it can contain a lot of the DNA of subsequent projects that we face. Basically, it's a library, a freestanding library for in the backyard of a house. On one side, it faces a very wide and panoramic view. On the other side, it faces a very narrow canyon view. So what we did, this is the plan in the section. What we did was we took the same rectangle and laid it horizontally to face the horizontal view and flipped it vertically to face the vertical view. And to connect it, we basically employed one curve. One curve, the same curve that is subsequently concave in section and convex in section, but in plan becomes flat and convex and concave again. So I think for us it's always using very simple elements and simple geometry, but using it in very different ways and multiple ways. So even that at the end there's some complex surface that was generated from it, but it was never about the algorithm of the surface. But we always think of the profile and the edges first, the outer limit of the perimeter, and then the surface became. This is a project in Pacific Palisades. It's the Hill House. It's situated on a very steep and uneven slope, and with a very uneven profile for the perimeter. And we always start our work looking at typologies. You know, what are the typical typologies of colonizing the hillside, whether it be Mario Botan Ticino or Craig Elwood levitating over the terrain, or the lower left Rudolf Schindler terracing against the rain, or a more typical Frank Lloyd Wright way of terracing down the terrain. We also had to deal with the hillside ordinance, which makes it very difficult to build on the hill. And at one point we decided to use the hillside ordinance instead of seeing it as a policing device, to use it as a generator of design, not unlike what Hugh Ferris did for New York with the setback rules. So step by step we begin to take all the requirements of the setback and then create the maximum buildable envelope. And for us, it's not really being a code jockey in the sense of registration of the setback, but this actually became the most advantageous way to situate the hill and also structurally to create the smallest footprint, and then the house projects out. In that way, we saved a lot of money to build the caissons. There was a previous house that was designed for the lot that utilized 26 caissons, and we managed to do it with 9 by having a smaller footprint and then subsequently projected out. So it's really a very site-specific form particular to the setbacks as well as the hill. Afterwards, we got so excited we used the same formula for the entire hillside and showed it to the planning department. But it didn't lead us anywhere. Because the house was designed so three-dimensionally, I think we also have the same strategies with the aperture. So on one hand, we maximize the envelope and minimize the footprint of the volume. On the other hand, we also did the same thing with the openings. So the areas where it faces the view, the openings are exaggerated, and when it faces the neighbor, it becomes small and also very deep. And there are apertures in all surfaces. Same thing with the cladding, because the house was conceived three-dimensionally. We didn't want to have a different material for the roof versus the walls. So at the outset, we thought of shrink wrapping the entire house with one material. And we thought of tiles first. That's where we did these experiments with jigsaw puzzle, just to get a very quick fix, to see the scale of the panels in relationship to the volume, or geometrically how it could turn. Eventually, we use a grail coat, a cementitious material that is waterproof, that's used for industrial roofs, and we shrink wrap the whole building with that. Because we built to the envelope of the building, we couldn't extend the balcony, so it's not a typical California mid-century indoor-outdoor situation where the floor or the ceiling extends beyond the glass. But because of the size of the windows, it basically flips the interior to the exterior, more like an exterior gazebo. And 80% of the year, you can basically slide open all the doors of the living room. The first level of the house is all built out of concrete, and structurally, the upper two levels are built out of steel. And we didn't express the steel for a few reasons. One reason is the building code is much more stringent. So the steel members, there are a lot more steel members, and a lot deeper and thicker steel members. And this house is about 100 meters, 100 yards from the Eames house. So we think if we expose the steel of this house, it would look like a steel house on steroids. So the only sense that you have that it's a steel house is really from the large cantilever, as well as having no structural columns within the space itself. I showed this collage that we did with Julia Schulman's photograph of the case study 22 before. And our friend said, well, you should show Julia Schulman the photograph, otherwise he could sue you. And we showed him the project before it was finished, and he liked it, so he actually came back and photographed the house in his way, with a lot of artificial lighting, underlit spaces and such. This is a piece by the Swiss artist Marian Müller, who took the Hill House and formed this tripartite, and with these diagonal lines that continue from one point to another. I think one thing we're interested in, besides the life of the house, is also the life of the house after it was finished, from discursive media, how artists use the house, how it is used as or interpreted. The house was exhibited in Frankfurt, the Architecture Museum, and when the curator told us that the house would be on the cover of the catalog, we were very pleased. But then when we got the catalog, not only was it abstracted, but it was also the base of the Statue of Liberty. But I think it confirmed our suspicion that we never aspired to be Bartoli, who designed the statue, but more to Richard Morris Hunt, who designed the base. There's another cover of this Kieran Long, the former editor of Icon, compilation of contemporary practices, who put the Hill House on the cover. And when we saw this cover, we contacted Didier Faustino at BioLab, who's also on the cover, to see if they're interested in doing a project together. Didier Faustino was interested, but Bio thing didn't call us back. This is a promotional CD that Grailcoat, the manufacturer of the cementitious cladding, distribute as a promotional CD. And when we got this CD, we realized that next time we should do the window like this. Not only would this be a better window, but I think when someone asks us the limit of the interface between architecture and software, we would have the architecture answer. This is a project that we're currently working on in Montepulciano in Toscana. It's a winery. And it's situated right on the edge of an existing cluster of villas, and where it will be entered from the top with a panoramic view. And similar to the Hill House, it's partially embedded in the ground, but on the other hand, it also protrudes out. Diagrammatically, I think we're always interested in two ways of interpreting a geometry. In this case, we showed how the roof is a single curve, but it's carved out, but it could also be understood as two wings that are spreading apart. I think we're always interested in how the profile of the view relates to the space itself. So from the top of the building where you enter, the building is very invisible. And then you enter through one of the wings that will become the wine tasting area, storage, through a courtyard, and then we can cross over to the other wing where the barrels are stored, and the fermentation is actually in the third wing where it's embedded into the ground. So we use a rusticated brick that is indigenous in the area, very strict codes in terms of the materials that can be used. So you see a slit, and you enter below the slit into a double height space, the wine tasting area, and then out to the courtyard, and then to the barrel on the other side. I think this spatial ambiguity, you can't always deduce one volume back to a single diagram, is something that we've been interested in. I think we always think like good work is has a lot of complexity, but doesn't look too complex. It dates back to one of our first projects, actually our first house in Marklee, Texas, the Mound House, which we're interested in this notion of another version of Philip Johnston's view as a wallpaper. How can we situate the view, the main view of this house right at the intersection of two wings? So it's a very typical Usonian organization, an open space for a living room and then a more private wing. The whole house built out of adobe construction, so very thick walls. But right when the two wings intersect, that's when there's the absence of structure, and then the canopy, and then the view kind of comes in some foreground, middle ground, background situation. This is a house that's just finished in Rosario, Argentina. This is a project that we did in collaboration with Diego Aragada, based in Rosario. And it's situated on the edge of a development, which this is one of the first houses that are there, but eventually on all three sides it will be filled with other developments. So at the outset we're thinking of, although right now it sits on this ideal Virgilian landscape, but pretty soon there will be other houses in a much more suburban setting. So we're thinking of, we do have this wallpaper view situation right now, but eventually the views will be compartmentalized. So how can we preemptively think of the choreography of the view and how that would work with the choreography of the circulation of the house? So as a result, it basically has a spiral circulation through the house, and every time you stop, there's a different view that's framed at different levels. And I think the same aspect happens on the exterior of the house as evolving, because it's not really a row house or a tract house that will never have that density. It's really an object situated in space. So we thought of how we can deploy the most direct or minimum means to achieve the maximum dynamism of the house. So geometrically, it's very simple. It's really a marriage of an oval and a square. And we slice off four corners. Two corners which are basically straight cuts that are cutting through curved surfaces, and then two surfaces that are curved. But basically, they're very dumb curves. They're basically a slice from a vault. We knew that we were designing the house, we had to have a certain remote control because we're in LA and the house is happening in Argentina. So we thought of ways where if the workers can do the formwork for a dome, they can do a formwork for a slice of the dome. So here you see the straight cuts that's diagonal, and then the two curved cuts. This was maybe a couple of months ago. This is pretty recent. So this was, I think, just completed last week. This is the upper diagram. We tried to unfold the circulation sequence and how all the views are adjacent or tangential to one of these cuts. So as you walk around the house, you're always next to one of these cuts or concrete surfaces, and then you see the view. This is one moment in the curved cut where we bring in skylight to illuminate the room, and then the end of the journey of the circulation is when you walk up to the roof. These are early attempts before we figure out the geometry, we're thinking of expressing this type of béton brut. I think that's something we always try to do is to preemptively think of the mistakes that could happen, especially when we are not sure how much control we have of the project. Here you see some of the construction shots underneath the framework, and the just finished interior, fresh off the press. Another thing, I just saw these photographs yesterday. It was just, the photograph was taken, I think 2 days ago. But we always think that if a photograph, an adopted photograph of a house looks like bad Photoshop work, it's a pretty good house. So we're pretty happy.
So we sort of had a long time fascination with the game of chess and even the design of chess sets. And I think mainly because somehow we see the game and the board as somehow a barometer for architecture, and in a way sort of elucidates design values. Looking at these boards from different times in history, from the board on the left of Joseph Hartwig from the 20s, where the abstraction of the pieces it reflects the way in which the pieces move across the board, or much more recently, the board of Michael Graves, where the characters are abstractions, almost caricatures of traditional chess pieces. And finally, the board of Karim Rashid, where with a new material, a new method of fabrication, the pieces themselves and even the board starts to kind of transform from a grid-like matrix. And maybe our fascination also comes from the fact that Bob and Mark spent endless hours poolside playing a lot of chess. But we're interested in kind of, with our sort of focus on the kind of disciplinary approach to architecture, we like the understanding the rules of chess that are both internal to the game and those that are external. So in this case, the shape of the character, the colors of the character, really are in a way external values. If they change, the way the game is played, it doesn't change at all. But if you started to change the number of chess pieces or the layout of the board itself, it would be an entirely new set of grammars. And so this thinking about rules that are internal and external to the discipline of architecture fascinate us, especially in this time when we see the boundaries of architecture eroding. We like to think about those kind of internal rules as a way to guide us, in a way focus in on that territory that's kind of eroding with a kind of strong disciplinary approach to our work. This next series of projects, they're all sort of box-in-box type projects, and I think reflect our interest in geometric ambiguity and the notion of questions of size in architecture. This was a quick proposal for an exhibition at LACMA for a Magritte show, a Magritte sort of surrealist compatriots. And there were sort of two logics. One, to design a series of sort of distorted and oblique boxes that set together in a kind of unsettling way within the landscape of the gallery, and then on the interior had a sort of rich and very divergent material quality on the inside. Or in this case, entrance to a series of galleries in Culver City, where we were interested in this kind of notion of corrected perspective, where works in plan and in section create a kind of perspectively corrected volume, which is this black piece. But because it's distorted both in plan and section, it creates a kind of strange spatial pressure in this interior alley, which connects several galleries to the street. This project, another interior exhibition project entitled Nano, was for another exhibition at LACMA in Los Angeles. And Nano, we worked with a group of nanoscientists and artists on the project, and it was a real challenge to find a kind of common language with them, because nanoscience deals with obviously very small particles, things that can only be understood through sensing, and sort of departs from the visual world. So we needed to find a kind of architectural language that was somehow isomorphic to the content of the exhibition. And so in our case, I guess timely and topical for you all was the Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map, which was a technique whereby we could both describe a kind of spherical landscape and unfold it into a series of buildable planes. And what was interesting for us here was this idea of sort of the oversized quality of the volumes that seem to kind of almost don't fit within this reused commercial retail space in Los Angeles, and the immersive kind of digital and more fluid world within where the artist's projection pieces were. And in this gallery, done a number of art spaces in Los Angeles, and this, probably the only thing that was somewhat interesting to us about the space when we found it was that there was a peculiar kind of warp to the way the roof plane of this auto body shop defined the interior space. And so through an insertion of a perimeter lining and this sort of warped single volume, we were able to create a kind of new volumetric space that was implied between the profile of the white wall that wraps the space and the roof plane above. This project it's actually a series of projects for a restaurant, probably maybe one of the smallest restaurants in Los Angeles, but we keep being asked to do more of them, so slowly they're getting bigger and bigger. And it's kind of a ubiquitous problem for young architects in Los Angeles, which is restaurants in mall-type spaces. And our strategy to overcome the kind of ubiquity of the mall space was to design something big and something warped to sort of overcome that scale. So here, attempting to use kind of geometry and scale to create a kind of dynamic landscape that overcome the background space. This is a house that we're designing in Kauai, and it sort of takes this idea of the box within a box to another scale. It was on the north shore of Kauai, so an incredible landscape, but sitting within a very tight perimeter landscaped hedge. And the interesting thing about Kauai is that it has a really intense tsunami zone. So on the one hand, there's obviously an impulse to create a very expansive view, and so intensify the linear footage of facade, but on the other hand, every house has to be designed so that it can completely be closed up in the case of a wind and flooded tsunami. So we kind of took on this diagram of the flower, something that would allow us to kind of do both and, multiplying the facade by 150% and carving in courtyards, but then at the same time developing a wrapper system that would allow the house to be closed up while lifting it on a series of kind of tree-like columns. This house is called the Vault House, and it's a fairly kind of typical beach property in Southern California, which is pretty dense, really long and narrow lots of about 35 feet wide by about 100 feet long. And we've done a lot of view houses by now, but this was a super intense one in terms of the kind of overwhelming problem of the view at the beach. And so we wanted to find a kind of spatial integer that we could repeat through the house that would somehow create a kind of equality throughout this long, kind of extruded, almost shotgun diagram, which for us became a kind of a vaulted space. And so every room in the house is a vaulted space that's kind of distorted, compressed, or expanded based on the program or the way the space is stacked in a section. And for us, what became interesting then was how the kind of accidents that happen when these spaces start to be are unified through this kind of unidirectional arrangement and the kind of surfaces that emerge. So here's a series of views that I think reflect the kind of transparency that we're looking for in the house. Well, this is a view from the entry courtyard out to the ocean. It starts to illustrate some of the other views that start to happen through the house, that both to the sky and back through to other volumes within. So this is from the second floor, and those are the kind of accidents that we're interested in, where you start to see the elevation of one vault through another that frame those views. And then this is looking back east away from the beach, where you can see the kind of transparency that we are being able to achieve, where at certain points, when the house is totally open, it's totally transparent all the way through. And then in contrast to that kind of striation in the section on the perimeter of the house, we're interested in these kind of deep cuts that reveal the house more as a kind of thick, dense mass. This project is in Venice, California, another house, and it is probably was most interesting to us when we began the project because it was the site of Morphosis' 2468 studio from the late 70s. And we knew right away that our project, given the importance of that project in Southern California and really for the early work of the firm, that we would need to design a house that was in a way a kind of host structure and a kind of background type building for the 2468 studio, and that we became interested in how to kind of radicalize this nondescriptness of a background building, and that the 2468 studio would really be the context for our project. And sort of surveying canonical square buildings, and looking at sort of speculative studies that Morphosis did, where the studio might proliferate, we sort of tried that. We literally tried to build that, but realized that we didn't have enough property to do it. So instead of this kind of quadrant arrangement, we serialized the 2468 studio, which is a 20 by 20 foot volume of space, into a void for a courtyard, and then another mass for the master bedroom, all connected by this kind of base element. In addition, the windows, the 2468 windows, which is where the studio got its name, are also played out in our project, but pushed to the corner of each one of these surfaces, so it becomes a much more sort of centripetal and dynamic arrangement of the aperture to the envelope of the building. So in this kind of background building, it's clad in a kind of gray stucco, where the main living spaces are sort of neutral and gallery-like, and then the private spaces, you can catch a glimpse of them here, are all together with the windows become sort of intense units of color in contrast to the living spaces. We had a chance during the course of this project to be involved in some real estate opportunities adjacent to the house, and began to speculate what we could do if we could actually take over the whole block. But in the meantime, someone made us an offer we couldn't refuse, so we sold and moved on. We also, similar to some of the images Mark showed, in collaboration with artists, in this case, this was the work of a photographer named Livia Corona. And we wanted to, in the way that we were sort of playing with the 2468 studio, we brought Livia to the house and wanted her to kind of make almost like a filmic essay about the house, or that's the project that emerged. In this case, she hired a number of actors, senior citizens, and created a narrative about the house for sale. So there's sort of potential buyers, looky-loos, and other guerrilla inhabitants that all were organized according to numerical groupings and colors of their outfits. And this was another project that we did right when the house was finished, working with the artist Jack Pearson. This is his site-specific wall paintings, and Jeff Elrod. And in addition, for one party, worked with some sound artists who did particular sound installations for each one of the rooms. And we always like this, we're interested in sort of life after our project, and these are some of the examples of the kinds of collaborations that we've done to kind of extend, see our work through other collaborators' eyes. This next series of projects looks at this kind of stacked box problem that is something that has emerged as a kind of type of project for us. This was a very typical project in Southern California. Need to stack a lot of program in a small space, so this was an existing garage, new artist studio, and sleeping quarters, and then the need for special lights. So for us, what we were interested in sort of exaggerating this problem of the stack by differentiating the garage space, the studio, and the light scoop, and then unifying it through the tiling of this fiber cement board, which wraps around all surfaces of the studio. And then in contrast to the interior, how the apertures work to sort of intensify that relationship between interior and exterior. That project is sort of this is the artist's studio and exhibition space called the Jack House, where we're sort of looking at that idea of solid and void and aperture further. This is a competition that starts to look at these interests at a larger scale. So we kind of take this typical typology. It's for a Korean cultural center in Shinjuku in Japan. So kind of a weird contextual problem already, but sort of looking at this idea of the solid base and the glass tower and inverting that. And that was sort of the first kind of destabilizing of the stack. And then we started to look structurally at how we could, by designing these two concrete piers and suspending a kind of box truss on top of that, we could both build a glass tower on that new kind of raised ground, as well as suspend large volumes like the theater and such within that section. So that kind of dynamic equilibrium is something that we're interested in. And then for the kind of materiality of the project, we looked at these sort of traditional enamel techniques and speculated on how we could kind of take this kind of extreme craftsmanship and understand it in a kind of contemporary way. This project is a competition entry for the San Jose Art Museum, and I think we should probably do a little disclaimer right now that we lost out to more successful schemes, including one of your esteemed chair, but the project still embodies some things that are interesting to us, so we wanted to share it with you, which is this problem of levitation. It's a kind of obsession we've had, a kind of the structural problem of levitation is something we've studied quite a lot, both in our office and in design studios. And what was interesting for us is that there was a sort of extreme problem of responding to the existing context of the kind of courtyard-like existing art building, but inserting quite a lot of new program without disturbing that. And so we liked that by raising the building, we were able to get sort of maximum exposure while minimizing our footprint within the courtyard. So basically, we distribute the main new studio spaces and library in this suspended cantilevered bar, and then all the educational spaces are embedded in the ground or in this raised courtyard plinth. And then, so the structural idea is that these two kind of sculptural legs support this cantilevered bar along with this one column. And then as a kind of counterweight, the library is located here, so that sort of optimizes the kind of load performance of the building. And it was sort of fun working on this project. We were working with engineers from Arab who were simultaneously working on the Guthrie Theater with Jean Nouvel, so they were really excited to think about big cantilevers with us. So this is basically the general diagram. Two full-height trusses cantilevered, and then these three structural feet. This project was a proposal for the Hong Kong Design Institute, a competition from a couple of years ago, and I think it takes this idea of stacking and kind of accumulation to the scale of sort of starting to approximate something quite big with small units as a kind of as an integer. And in this case, it was we sort of began by stacking all the kind of program elements, and then once we kind of figured out how this logic, we started warping that and figuring out a kind of more complex set of spatial relationships that could emerge from that. So each one of these modules is 15 meters by 60, and it began to kind of warp and transform based on urban conditions around the site, as well as kind of parameters internal to the building. And what we were interested in was, with this kind of simple set of units, we began to kind of create a lot of richness in the kind of, it read as both a solid mass with kind of porous holes, and it had a kind of interesting surface quality at the same time. And through its massing, began to kind of approximate a kind of scale that addressed the surrounding sort of high-rise residential towers and even some of the hillside landscape beyond it. Organizationally, it in a way was ordered by a kind of very traditional Chinese logic of a kind of courtyard that organized and created a kind of dynamic space within the school. And it also sort of reminded us, we were inspired by, this is the work of Henri Sauvage that is known obviously quite well in Paris, these kind of big city blocks that through stepping and carving out creates this very kind of rich urban section. This was a project, part of an exhibition and lecture that we gave at Syracuse last year, where students sort of wrote a set of rules about the kind of logic of assembly from the Hong Kong project, and they built a portion of it and sort of experimented with different kind of programming and such. Another kind of fascination of ours is kind of issues of multiplicity and how kind of singularity and difference can be understood through logics of coherence. And this is a piece by Damien Hirst entitled "Isolated Elements Swimming in the Same Direction for the Purposes of Understanding." And for us, it's both kind of a humorous piece, the kind of absurdity of resuscitated fish mummies is something that could bring coherence, but simply through them all swimming in the same direction gives it a kind of a logic that sort of made sense to us. And I think that we have worked on a number of projects of different scales where this kind of idea of coherence has emerged. And this was the first project entitled Critical Mass, which was a series of exhibitions that traveled throughout Southern California and Mexico, where we were using, it's comprised of 3,000 recycled bottles that have traveled about 600 miles in the course of their various installations. And they basically were interested in this idea that this sort of very simple set of horizontal lines indexed by the liquid level could map kind of pretty complex sets of information sets that would result in a series of curved lines. And so the different installations map particular data of the sites that they were studying, as well as registered some site-specific elements of their context. So this was one of the installations in Tijuana. It also, I think, brings to bear an interest we have in the work of Solowitt, where, particularly in his wall drawings, he developed a technique where simply providing a set of rules, the quality of the wall, the kind of pencil, that anybody could literally carry out his work through the kind of rule-making exercise. And these projects were carried out in that way as well. And we like that kind of distance and kind of potential for accident that can happen. So this is some images from the Maison Margiela store in Los Angeles, where kind of material accumulation starts to produce a kind of intensity of effect from one of the kind of display elements, or the facade itself, which was made up of white acrylic discs that create a pretty dynamic effect just because of the sheer number of them and the way they interact with light and wind and such. Or the kind of conjoined shop of Mamed, which is in the other side of the building, where the kind of intense accumulation of these storage units and the kind of way their edges form starts to create a kind of material and spatial intensity to the way this wall divides space and ultimately becomes a storage and display element. And this project for the Murakami show, which has been sort of traveling everywhere, here, working within a very clear and simple matrix of a kind of cellular display system, but by finding kind of different taxonomies of organization, whether it's through the kind of light qualities of the cheap IKEA LED lights or the taxonomies of color, size, flatness, we're able to kind of create a rich landscape for the display of the kakikiki elements. And then this project, which is a very large project, 2,500 units of workers' housing in Tianjin, in China. And so unlike the kind of very fashionable districts of Beijing and Shanghai, this is like social workers' housing. So no twisted towers, no funny business here. This is really hardcore housing project. And what was interesting for us is that we needed to find a kind of maximum efficiency in the way that the units would be comprised. So looking at kind of dealing with the perimeter and a series of 5, 10, and 15-story towers that could create the kind of density that our clients needed. But then also there was some very serious concerns kind of about landscape symbolism and such. So there was a really strong desire for a kind of central garden and how to kind of stitch together these centralizing interests with this very dense matrix of housing. And once we began to kind of understand how the cores work together with these units, we began to kind of look at how we could start stretching out the relationship between units, and so that we might be able to find more void space within the tower itself and kind of change the relationship of dependence on the ground. These next projects start to look at the kind of notion of the big roof as an organizing principle. That's another kind of aspect of our work that has emerged over the years. And in most cases, the logic really emerges from a kind of very elemental kind of tectonic logic of assembly and the kind of post and beam system. So we tend to start really small and keep trying out similar ideas. So here, literally, we were working at the scale of a book. It was a proposal for a graphic design identity for the city of Palm Springs, where we started to look at these kind of serialized planes, almost making a mirage on the facade of the book, and then had a chance also in Palm Springs to develop a series of canopies for a residence there. And what we were interested in is, again, working within the simple tectonic logic, how we could vary the contour of the fin and create a kind of more complex surface. we were, these projects and the next competition, which is for the Palos Verdes Arts Center, was really, like, I think the first year of our practice. So we were surprised to see some of these ideas employed in a tower here in Chicago during our trip. And I guess the jury's out if it works better horizontally or vertically. But in any case, this was a project for an art center in Palos Verdes. And there were kind of three organizing principles for us. One, there was a number of existing buildings. And so those needed to stay. And so the first idea for us was understanding the art center as a campus. So proliferating these kind of volumes distributed around courtyards. And the next was the idea as art center as fog. And there was a number of existing trellis on the site, which we proposed in a way to obviously develop a kind of hopefully new and improved version of that, which would somehow unify the entire campus and create a kind of landscape in and to itself, both through the qualities of light and shadow, and also there's a lot of visibility of this site from above, from a residential area. And so we thought a lot about the roof plane as a kind of a layer of fog, as a kind of new landscape. And then finally, the idea of the landscape as a kind of emergent quality that could begin to embed some of these new volumes and form another layer for experiencing the site. And in this project, which is a restaurant in Los Angeles, again looking at the canopy, in this case it was for a kind of Thai restaurant, so we developed a ceiling panel system that reflected a series of orchid petals that became a kind of a light source, both a restaurant and a club, and so there was a number of kind of lighting scenes that could animate that surface according to the time of use. And then finally, I guess coming a little closer to home, this is our proposal for the Calumet Environmental Center in south of Chicago. And for us, we were interested in, this is sort of our version of Frank Lloyd Wright meeting Tony Smith, for those of you who know the work of Tony Smith. And so it was a series of lily pad-like roof canopy elements that were clustered together according to kind of programmatic criteria, as well as how it could nest within the kind of delicate ecosystem of the site. And so in the end, it sort of brought together, for us, a lot of kind of important traditions of Chicago architecture, the kind of universal space of Mies, the kind of craftsman quality of the cast-in-place concrete canopies, and of Sullivan, and then the kind of industrial kind of production of LeBaron and Jenny. And this kind of big canopy idea, we like to understand this project for BP that we did in Los Angeles together with Office Daw based in Boston and Brand Innovation Group, a division of Ogilvy, in this context of a kind of big roof project where in this case it was an existing gas station site, and our project was really to kind of regroup these elements of the column, the roof canopy, and the pay kiosk together with the kind of intrusion of the billboard as part of one kind of big roof structure, and kind of almost as a billboard. And then finally, this project, which literally was going to be cited in Chicago, a kind of further study of this work for BP. And in our case, we were studying the retail kind of education building, and it made us really happy to kind of come back to the box and begin to start to think about the problem of the box within a box. And so in this case, it was both a retail space and kind of an educational space where we started to look at these kind of periscope-like structures that had brought light and air and different kind of phenomena into the space as part of a landscape of kind of light and material.
This is an image that represents thoughts on the notion of liberating versus forming mechanisms, and how that help us think about how to deal with the mechanisms of approximation. But because we're running out of time, I'm not going to talk about this. I've been talking about this for 10 years. I still don't quite understand what I'm saying. But this is what intrigues me. It makes me want to think about it more, but I'm going to skip it. This is a project for Autos 100. Some of you might know it's organized by the artist Ai Weiwei with Herzog Denmark, where they invited 100 architects around the world to each do a 10,000 square feet villa in Inner Mongolia. And
You're right, Bobby. Mongolia is super western China, right next to Albertsons.
and the site is really a desert right now. And I guess this is not the first time that you see this kind of big architectural orgy happening together, but maybe not at this scale, from whether it be Sakoponic or Weissenhof-Siedler, maybe in a much smaller scale. It's almost like demonstration. And I think when we see our colleagues' work, this is Preston, this is Michel Rochkin, Francois Roche, Julian de Schmidt, NL, Alejandro Aravena, Michael Merida. I mean, it's for us, it's very interesting to see these schemes because they treated the villa as it's sitting in a desert with nothing else around it. Well, when we design our project, at the outset we know that the desert is not the context you have to deal with, but 99 other egos and the desire to express. So we know it's going to be something situated in a zoo. So I think we're thinking, what is the opposite situation? How do you deal with maybe a more quiet solution? It got us thinking about the idea of the primitive hut. It's not very fashionable to think about it now, but maybe in this context it might work. And not so much the typical thatch roof house form. We're trying to think of what is the next step beyond this thatch roof hut. We think it's really the double house. When a house form begins to proliferate as a double house, it's maybe the first step of being a city or seeds of urbanism. So we begin to think of how the thatch roof house could proliferate, and while sectionally organized quite differently, where it becomes more public below and more private above, while planimetrically it's more private in one section, on one chunk, and more public on the other. We also wanted to create this kind of something that is recognizable on one hand, but not recognizable in different as you walk around the site in consideration of views and such. So it seems like something that is that you see and recognize, but I also think the way that we think of the geometry, that there isn't one specific face, similar to what we did in Argentina, and also the checkerboard organization of the apertures. Create a different visual reading of weight versus transparency. I think it's also similar to the view house. It has this spiraling circulation, and we think a lot about how the apertures are either very flat or very deep. As an interior of the house, I think we're constantly reminded of this primitive house form that always occur, whether it be in the upper level of the house, or in the room itself, or sometimes even in an open double height space. You see the profile of a negative house existing as the light core. And I think this is the first round of the 100 projects. And I think the latest we heard is 30% of the projects have thatch roofs. I think this project also, like many projects, although there's sometimes smaller scale projects, we always try to think of a larger urban consequence that could be generated from that house itself. I think it also started off with one of the first commissions that we got working in the city of Martha after Donald Judd's passing for a foundation that began to acquire small houses to be transformed into writers and poets in residence. So it has a type of infiltration of these blue volumes that are scattered throughout the site, together with the brown volumes of Judd's Martha that are interwoven with the everyday fabric. So it's almost like a de Menil problem that Piano faced of how an institution could remain its institutional identity, but be interwoven within the site. So over the last, I'd say, the first 7 or 8 years, we've done a series of small buildings that, whether it be freestanding buildings or interior projects, that we try to address that. At one point, we were commissioned to do a library, but at the end, it never happened. That we took basically the module of the site and created a series of solutions that we have to present to the board. And at the end, they adopted the U scheme, although they also like the H scheme or the okay scheme here. This last project I'd like to show is a mixed-use complex in the city of Grottaferrata, 20 kilometers south of Rome. And it is for a private museum, housing, and a hotel, a park, as well as a arts foundation that will sponsor artists in residence program. It's right next to a 10th century monastery. The park itself will be deeded back to the city, and a lot of existing buildings will be demolished. It's an old hotel that has been abandoned since the 1980s with a 19th century villa that somehow anchors the entire site. So we did a lot of studies, analysis of this type of dispersed museum, the dispersed model of a museum. What we call, like, whether it be an art in the park idea, whether it be a Jinhua Arts Park, or Storm King, or Hombrick in Germany, or Serpentine in London, versus this type of art urbanism, whether it be Deer in New York in the 80s, the Menil, Marfa, or the Berlin Biennale. So we begin to design this series of pavilions, that each of them could be an art space, or production space, or studio space, that could be scattered throughout the site. I think for us, the two models that interest us, one is Tunis La Villette, where the point line and plane are overlaid throughout the site, and the grid basically becomes an index of equidistance. And because of the equidistance, I think the pavilions could be slightly different and addressed to the specific program. The other one is John Haydock's Mass, which creates this hyper-specific characters that occupy the stage. And we try to think of a model between these two, but somehow closer to this. So we begin to, on one hand, scatter our pavilions. On the other hand, begin to combine them in different ways to form, to approximate characters, whether it be the creative offices who assumes this kind of object in the park idea that approximates the scale of the villa and the hotel, or grouping 5 pavilions horizontally and hinging them together to connect to a 19th century brick building, or extruding them and becoming a series of housing, whether they would still be 2 or 3 pavilions that would be scattered in the park. So in this case, you see how the 5 pavilions join together to form the mothership of the museum, connected to an existing building with 2 other pavilions at the edge. Or when we group 9 of the pavilions together, not unlike the experiment we did for the Hong Kong Design Institute, for the creative offices also housing a gallery and artists in residence in the ground floor. So in that way, each of the volumes, the collective volumes, approximates the shapes of its surrounding or its context, but at the same time maintains its independence. The housing project, we invited HHF, a Swiss firm, who did a lot of housing projects with us to design this together. And basically, because of the view being most adventurous on the top, all the housing are entered from the top. So the roof becomes the lobby, and then for each unit, which occupies the entire 3 floors, enter from the top, and then descend down into the living room, and then the subsequent master and other bedrooms. In the interiors of the units. And the landscape is designed by Togetech from Berlin, where they created a network of paths that connected all these pavilions together. So I think unlike La Villette, I think that the paths are much more subtle. You really feel the objects in the space, and then the landscape somehow insinuates the connection. I think because we started with some art projects, we like to conclude with 3 pieces by John Baldessari. I think it summarizes our approach and our thinking towards approximation. This first piece is titled Using Your Finger to Achieve a Straight Line. And I think for us it's about establishing an ideal, in this case a straight line, and use what you have in your hands, what you have disposable to you to achieve that. And rather than lamenting that what you do will never achieve that ideal, use the disjunction between what you can do and what the ideal is as the content of the work. The other is also from the 70s, and Baldessari is throwing 3 balls into the air to achieve an equilateral triangle, the best of 36 tries. So not only is similar to the first project, there's this notion of the ideal and the chance, but also the process of how many times you try it become part of the content of the work. And then the last one is titled Using Cigar Smoke to Match Different Clouds. No matter how absurd it is, the task that's given to us, in this case, use cigar smoke to match the clouds. I think we always think of, we always catch ourselves when we have a cigar match, we tend to dissect the cigar and use the match to organize the tobacco so it will simulate a cloud, and we'll be very self-congratulatory with our effort. But I think this image reminds us not to forget the most direct way is to light the cigar, taste the tobacco, and then if you're lucky, you get to make some clouds on the side. So that's our lecture. Thank you very much.
Obviously, there's a pretty diverse set of kind of interests in our work, and so it's not, we can't really make a global answer to that, but we appreciate the question. And I think maybe in the case of the View House, which might be the project we're talking about, where we're carving, in that case, it came from some kind of parameters of the site that place limitations on the footprint. So we wanted to kind of minimize the footprint and maximize the volume of the house. So we started looking at ways that we could, with really simple geometric exercises, begin to articulate that small footprint and project out. And I mean, obviously there's a kind of architectural intent, and those cuts could have been anything. But I think we were looking both at how it would generate movement through the house and so forth. And maybe in the case of the fins, some of the kind of horizontal big roof projects, a lot of those things came to do with how the kind of sun performance would be. And so, there was a lot of studies in the case of the Art Center where the profile would be contoured such that it would maximize light, presence of open space, for example. So,
when you mentioned the environment, I don't know specifically what you mean by environment, but I think for us, we try to deal with a lot of issues. But also sometimes we find certain issues are not generative of form, that we have to deal with. But I think like green issues or sustainable issues are important, but oftentimes it's not form generated. So we have to respond to it, we have to deal with it, but something else needs to come in. I mean, maybe it's too universal. I mean, we deal with it very specifically, but I think the example you gave about carving the roof, for us, it's more spatial. When things are fragmented, how do you bring something back into united? But I think the key for us is that move that's seemingly superfluous it's not the first thing to notice. I think those who are thinking of coming to UIC should all come.